Welcome back to New Money. We're discussing estate planning this evening. My guests, Harry Joffe and Gordon Stewart. If you'd like to email, you can send your email to info@anchorcapital.co.za. I will need two more questions to Harry and Gordon, and then I will get on to emails. The first one is very much to you, Gordon. Can you appoint an alternative trustee?
An alternative trustee?
Yeah.
Like an alternate director?
Yeah.
No.
Can't.
No.
You
Not
can't
that I'm aware
dissipate
of.
your authority. You've got to be the trustee and
Yeah.
you've got to act, and you can't give that up.
So I'm a trustee. I can then say to Harry, would you please, provided the trustee allows for this, Harry, would you please carry this particular action out for me? But I can delegate the responsibility, but I can't delegate the authority. So I still remain ultimately responsible.
You can't
and
abdicate
accountable.
your responsibility.
Yeah.
That's
Okay, then some months ago, when you weren't available, we had Mervyn Messias on the program. Mervyn's written 2 books on trust. I don't know if you had a look at them.
No, well-known name.
But Mervyn made the point about rather than having a testamentary trust in the will,
Yeah.
you actually bypass that by setting up a bottom drawer trust.
I would agree with that.
Which, Gordon, you love. Your firm does that.
Offshore. Which kind of are we talking?
And offshore.
Yeah, but I would agree with that entirely, because if you take a look at a testamentary trust, first of all, you are now bequeathing assets to people who you've never met before, and they've never met you. So there's no connection between the individual and the trustee.
And wouldn't you say, I leave assets to a trust, and these are the trustees?
Yeah, but you generally would not ever have met those trustees.
Because it's a professional trust company.
Yeah. So, but at least if you're setting up the bottom drawer trust with a Curo, you're still going to meet me, you'll meet Yasmin, so there will be some form of connection. The second one is that a lot of these offshore testamentary trusts tend to come to an end at some stage, which means that the assets go in, the assets come out, and it's back into the hands of an individual again. Whereas with the bottom drawer trust, it's a perpetual trust. It continues until the trustees tend to shut it down. And the last one is the letter of wishes or the letter of guidance. There is no letter of wishes or guidance with a testamentary trust, but there is with a bottom drawer trust. So you really are getting a much better option for the bottom drawer trust than you are with the testamentary trust. Plus the bottom drawer trust you can activate at any time going forward. So you've already got your offshore trust sitting waiting to receive your inheritance, but if you want to start it sooner, you can. It's much better option.
I agree with Gordon 100%. The final thing to add is the delay. So if you've got a testamentary trust and you die, that will has to be read, the will has to be approved, and then the trust can be set up. You know, with the bottom drawer trust, it's already set up. So if there's, for example, we've had it, if there's a life policy to pay out, with a bottom drawer trust, we'll pay out within 48 hours. Whereas with a testamentary, you could wait weeks and weeks before the money can pay out.
Now, you mentioned the word offshore. What about onshore?
Onshore, we used to do that back here, is that we would create a dormant trust, pay your 100 Rand stamp duty to the master, but then it would hold no assets. And we would actually typically use those for retirement annuities. So when the RA became the living annuity, the individual was a bit concerned about passing it, for example, down to his spouse, because he was worried that he or she would then cut out the children from the first marriage of the deceased, and then we would create this, and then the living annuity would then pay out into the trust, and the trustees would continue.
So was Mervyn mainly concentrating on offshore trusts?
I'm sure difficult to say, but the same concept.
We don't have a name though, Bryan. We don't have the name bottom drawer trust for local. We've got, as you say, a dormant trust.
Dormant trust.
Bottom drawer trust is really for offshore trusts in the offshore trust industry.
In your trust planning office, do you do dormant trusts?
Yeah, I mean, I hate a testamentary trust, I must be honest. It's better than nothing, let's be fair, but we have so many issues because now, look at the case now with the master. So you die, the master's offices are not functioning well, so you don't get a letter of authority, so the executor can't set up the testamentary trust. So you could wait 3 months. And in that time, and we've got cases where there's policies which we can't pay out because there's no trust to pay to. Whereas if you had a dormant trust already set up, you bypass that problem.
So if Discovery set up this department and they'll do that?
What department?
Well, an operation where people can appoint Discovery, bottom drawer trust.
We won't do it for local, we do it for offshore.
No, but for local.
Local, there's no concept as a bottom drawer, it's just a dormant trust. So you would set up a dormant trust, pay your fee, and just have nothing in it.
Okay. Well,
but Bryan, sorry, let's make the point. A testamentary trust is better than no trust at all, please.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's get some emails. Sean in Somerset, I'm going to give this one to you, Gordon. He says, I have a trust and I use the conduit principle for all 3 children. However, one lives overseas. I understand from our accountants that there was a recent amendment which does not allow the conduit principle for the one living overseas. The chances are that another one of my children will leave. Is it advisable to maintain the trust?
I can't comment if it's advisable to keep the trust or not, because you're going to need to look at the assets in the trust and what the impact would be on his estate if you closed it down. But yeah, there has been the change. So they've brought income in line with capital gains. So capital gains always used to be that you could not distribute a gain out to a non-resident beneficiary, but income you could. And now they've just brought it in line that if you do distribute to a non-resident beneficiary for income and gains, the trust pays the tax on it.
So that's double the tax that you pay as an individual.
No, it's not double. Well, yeah, but it's just tax that the trust.
CGT at 80%.
Yeah, they apply the conduit because they get the tax from the beneficiary. But if it's a non-resident beneficiary, they're not getting the tax from the beneficiary easily, so they want to get the tax from the trust. But of course, the trust rate is higher than the beneficiary.
45 and 36.
Do you think all auditors are doing that?
Yes, there's a lot of publicity around that.
There was, okay. Then Harry James in Camps Bay says, recently was a new ruling from SARS allowing a tax practitioner to update the identification and e-filing for South Africans living abroad. Apparently, there's also been blocked by SARS. There's a belief that if an international tax player is overseas, he would have to fly back to South Africa.
Can I speak from experience here? Yeah. I've just done that. I went through the experience. I mean, I've been out of South Africa now for 8 years. In February, March this year, I got a letter from my tax practitioner saying, SARS want to know what's going on. And I said, okay, it's time to make me non-resident. There's a letter that SARS sent out. You provide all the information. I sent it through to my tax practitioner. They submitted it to SARS, and I think in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I got the letter back from SARS saying, thanks, you're now classified as non-resident.
So
it was that simple.
So it's not that difficult for...
No. Right, of course, the one problem is the exit tax. So all your assets, you pay capital gains tax the minute you become a non-resident. So your worldwide assets, apart from property in South Africa, get subject to tax.
So you now, being out of South Africa, have had to pay capital gains tax?
I didn't have to because I'd done all of my taxes when I left SA 8 years ago. So this was really just putting on record that I'm now a non-resident.
Gordon's got all his assets in a trust, of course.
Gordon, I can't believe, if you think about it, you've been out of this country 8 years.
Yeah.
I don't think you've done half a dozen live programs with me.
I know, it's been difficult to try and organise the schedules. It's much more fun being in the studio, Brian, than it is doing it via Zoom.
I'll get Corin.
The first time Gordon's worn long pants in 8 years.
And socks and shoes.
My diary is important because the studio sets the different topics. You've got to have to fit in with Gordon, otherwise...
Gordon's long pants schedule.
Then, Kenny, I'm going to give this one to you, Gordon. Can we change our marital status by appointment, by agreement, and is it very costly?
No, I'm going back in my memory banks here, Brian, but I think you had to get formally divorced. Harry, you must jump in and correct me.
Let me jump in, because we had a case like this. So we had a fascinating case, if we got 2 minutes. A middle-aged man was in Mauritius, met a lovely young lady in Mauritius on holiday. They got married there and then, didn't sign an antenuptial contract, so they married in community of property.
Yeah.
He came back to South Africa, realized what he had done, and now there's a court process. You have to go to court to amend your matrimonial property regime.
So you can?
You can, but
you can do it.
To answer that, you can.
It's an application to court, you've got to give notice to creditors, and you've got to go through a process.
Yeah.
And of course she has to agree.
Yeah.
Or he.
No, I understand by agreement, but you can get it done.
But it's a court process.
It's a court process,
good 45,000 Rand for the day in court.
Okay. Then Abby in Bedford View says, I've been offered a policy by an insurer which covers all the fees, including estate duty. The condition is that I appoint this company as executor of my estate. Harry, is that one from you, Discovery?
No, because we're not an executor in wills at this stage. But what a lot of companies do, I mean, we do it as well. You get a policy which covers executors' fees and testamentary trustee fees and conveyancing fees, as long as you appoint the insurance company's chosen executor. It doesn't have to be necessarily the insurance company. And there's a good reason for that, because to fund the policy and make it cheap, we do a deal with the executor to give a discounted rate. So the policy's got very cheap premiums, typically between 100 and 180 Rand a month, because the executor's fees we're paying to the executor are discounted. And that's how it works for everyone.
Okay. Abby, Peter in... No, this is for you, Gordon. Peter in Durban says, I have 2 daughters, one living in Australia and one in the UK. I have onshore and offshore investments. can I leave my offshore assets to an offshore trust?
Yes, you can. Yeah, and Brian, that's actually quite common, and it ties in with the bottom drawer trust. But just a caveat, he may want to do some proper planning, because it wouldn't be beneficial for his child living in Australia to be a beneficiary of that offshore trust because of the way Australia taxes distributions. So in theory, yes, he can, but in practice, he may want to determine whether that's beneficial to his
Okay,
children.
so every jurisdiction has a different set of laws.
Yes.
And you've got to understand it. You can't just do it.
Yeah, very much so. And this is where it's getting quite complex from an international estate planning perspective, because take a South African who's got a South African trust and who's maybe got a child living in the US, in Australia, and in the UK. Each one of those particular jurisdictions has got different ways of taxing distributions coming out of that trust that is here in South Africa. And a lot of South Africans forget that that trust is actually considered as an offshore trust in those.
So Bryan, I must be honest, what we found with a lot of South Africans with kids in the US or Australia, which is very, very negative against offshore trusts, we find it much more efficient to have an offshore wrapper, an endowment wrapper, which doesn't get caught by a lot of those rules. And it's much cheaper, much simpler than an offshore trust.
Yeah.
Well, I've got so many more emails and so many questions to ask. I'm sorry, guys, we've run out of time. I've often made the point, who should be or who should not want to be a trustee. There are so many changes. If you're a trustee, I suggest that you get all the details you need from a trust practitioner of the dangers. All professional firms have professional indemnity insurance. It is unlikely that an individual person acting as trustee would have any protection of any claim made by a beneficiary. Once again, I appreciate you guys being here. Lovely to have you in the
Yeah,
studio.
likewise.
Gordon, it's important to note that our program tonight is to provide information and should not be construed as advice. Next week's program, we'll be dealing with financial and retirement planning, and if you need to get hold of me, my details will appear on the screen. I'd like to thank you for watching, and good night.